Good morning. Welcome to our Wednesday morning industry insight. I'm Miriam Glaze. I'm the founder of Athlete Soul. I'm here with three former athletes this morning. We're going to be talking about working in marketing. Great panel today. I'm really excited about it because we have some really different profiles. So before we get started with the introduction, just as we know, every Wednesday morning we record those events. They will be available on our website afterwards at athletesoul.space. Just wanted to make sure you knew that. And if you have any question you want to ask during this event, feel free to do that either in the Q&A box or in the chat box. I'll record the question and ask them to our panelists at the end of the discussion. So we're going to get started straight away with intros, and I'm going to pass it on to Stephanie Forte, who will tell us a little bit more about herself and what she's doing at the moment. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Forte, and Miriam, thank you so much for inviting me to join this panel. I love what you're doing and wish that Athlete Soul had been around when I went into retirement. I am a former professional rock climbing athlete. I started climbing in the early 90s, and in 1999 became one of a handful of women in the world to climb the grade of 514. I went on the competition circuit because back then in the late 90s and early 2000s, that's really the way that you could provide value to your sponsors. And sadly, in the first televised bouldering competition, I blew out my shoulder, which kind of sent me into an immediate retirement because I was out for about a year. And in that time, I ended up doing a lot of writing and then somehow started a PR agency. So for 15 years, I ran a lifestyle and health and fitness specialty public relations agency in Las Vegas, where I had been living. And today I am a brand storytelling consultant and work with a lot of marketing teams.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm going to pass it straight away to Camilo, and then we'll go with Richie after that. Camilo, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Super pleasure to be here. It's really an exciting time. So my name is Camilo Andrade. I am a former water skier and now currently work for Nike. I am the global vice president for Nike football. So super exciting to be here and sharing the floor with Stephanie and Richie.
Richie, you want to go with your introduction? Thank you.
I'll jump in here. Again, thank you for having us all here. Excited to contribute to this conversation. I am a former professional hockey player, and I've played for the U.S. national team. I've represented Italy in international competition and played professionally across several different continents. And that was my entire life. You know, I grew up in Boston, and it was a hockey city, a hockey family, sports-centric from age 3 up until 25 when I retired from the sport. Moved back to Boston and took about 12 to 18 months kind of sorting through internships, entry-level positions, and found my footing, most comfortable and uncomfortable situation, which was founding Ricky, which is my creative project management agency, and specializing first with idea generation and implementation. So every day is fun, creative, and we'll dive into all the parts that it's all under the umbrella of marketing with different niches per client.
And I think it's exciting to have the three of you together because we're going to see the two sides of marketing, whether you're working on the side of the brand like Camilo or like, you know, on the side of the creative side or the agency side, whether it's a big agency or a smaller one from your side, guys. So I think being able to have the two sides and understanding that they work hand in hand, I think is super important. So now that we have a little bit of background on who you are and what you do, I'd like to dive into your professional career, business career, not the athletic one. This is what we're going to be focusing on today, and hear more about your current education, your current position, and how you got to it. So tell us a little bit more about education, was that important to the position that you have right now? And then your experiences before you got to the position you're in, if you think that there is a specific path or not to getting in that position. And maybe we go through the same order as we just did. So Stephanie, if you want to get started, please.
Sure, I'll start. So I did my undergraduate. I have a degree in finance and economics. I had a minor in accounting, and I was fast-tracked to get my MBA. So I did my first year of my MBA as an undergrad, and then kind of woke up my senior year and thought, God, what did I do? I had wanted to be a journalist, and I took this path into finance, and I had always been very fascinated with business. My career as an athlete is maybe a little bit different than other people's. It's somewhat unconventional because it's a lifestyle sport, and I think because of the time period in which climbing was, at least competitive climbing and being an athlete, it was a much different world in the late 90s and early 2000s than it is today. But I had moved to a ski town, learned to climb, and just fell in love and started climbing and started securing sponsorships once I had the accomplishments to make that happen. But, you know, in climbing, there wasn't a lot of money for athletes. And if the whole of money for athletes in climbing was a chicken pot pie, the amount that was allocated to women was like a couple of peas and carrots. So you had to have a sort of a side hustle. And mine was writing. And I started writing for the climbing magazines, which led to writing for national publications and really understanding how media works. So it was sort of a natural transition for me to go from being a writer and a freelance writer into public relations and learning how to build stories. And I think that my education, while it may not seem like, oh, how do you take a degree in finance and economics and translate that into opening a PR agency? I think I just wasn't as maybe intimidated of the idea of opening a business because I had some of that background. But everything that I actually do for a living, I sort of learned as I was doing it.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's really interesting that you had a lifestyle sport and sort of mix that with your writing, and eventually your writing became your profession, and it all mixed together. And you're right, sports climbing is sort of something that you do forever. So it's a really interesting path that is unusual and different. Camilo, can you share what your path has been, please?
Yeah, for sure. First, that's super inspiring, Stephanie. For me, it was a little bit different. I can say that in parallel to my water skiing, let's say, career or life, I was always very passionate about storytelling, and I've had two sides of me that didn't necessarily come to fruition. I've always loved music, and of course, in a way, stand-up comedy. So it's interesting how, because maybe I wasn't good at those two, but I found a common thread, and that was the ability to making people feel something. I always thought that marketing was probably the perfect path. So yeah, I studied marketing, and honestly, at some point in my career, I had to actually really invest myself on really studying and at the same time keeping my training to actually perform on the competitions in water skiing. So I started my career early, I'm gonna say 20 years ago, and literally I was just seeking for experience. So at the beginning, I really had a tough time adjusting to the corporate world and actually finding my passion. And I can tell you that for 12 years, I basically built a little bit of the muscle to work in a corporation, not necessarily working in the most passionate industries, but that gave me a great school for understanding how to move within the matrix of the corporate world. And of course, understanding how to not only build brands, but work with multi-diverse cultures. So from working with Pirelli, the telecommunications company, to then working with Nestle, the wellness or nutrition company, to then working with L'Oreal, the cosmetics company. I think that was a very diverse journey. And the one thing that I can tell you that I've learned throughout those different experiences, that I learned how to adapt. I learned how to think differently. I learned how to look at things from different angles. And of course, water skiing and sport gave me the ability to really work hard and being resilient and knowing that it was never going to be easier. So a lot of the things that I've learned from water skiing allowed me to be a good professional. And I think it's mostly discipline, of course, the working ethic that you get as an athlete. I think that's fundamental, and most importantly, the not giving up mentality. But the one thing that I was missing in those first 10 years of my career was passion. And I think that as a former athlete, that's the one thing that you know that is fundamental to be successful is you need to love what you do. And I think all of us as former athletes, we do the things we do because we love them. All the sacrifices, all the concessions, you make them consciously and intentionally because you love what you do, right? And you don't look at the sacrifices from the negative. You see them as just one more step to get to your goal. So, well, after 10 years of almost working in L'Oreal, I had this epiphany moment where I realized that although I had a successful career and a great job, the job didn't define me, right? And I was missing the passion and the fire for being in love with what I did. And I knew sports was that industry, right? I know that sports can be a catalyzer for positive social change. And I needed to work in sports. I knew that in the bottom of my heart, if I could be successful in industries where I didn't necessarily feel a connection, I knew that I could definitely make a change or at least have a positive impact if I could somehow get into the sports industry. So after almost 10, 12 years of seeking an opportunity in the sports industry, I managed to make it happen. That was the moment where I managed to marry all my professional experience, what I knew about marketing, what I knew about business, with my passion. And that was the passion to help athletes to perform better and to build brands around them and to use them, of course, as a voice for positive social change. And then, of course, life has its ways, and Nike came, knocked on my door in a moment where I was really happy at Red Bull, and I decided to join Nike. And it's been one of the greatest experiences of my life. It's been, of course, a roller coaster for sure. A lot of different experiences. I've had now 4 jobs in less than 6 years, different cities, different countries, but it's been a blessing. Having the ability to in a way inspire people and to bring that inspiration to every athlete around the world to create impact in the world, it's a privilege. So that's been a little bit of my journey. Definitely every day of my life, I take learnings from my water skiing career. I still water ski, so every day I'm reminded on the things that I need to do on the water and then at the office. There's definitely a lot of interdependencies between both, and I just feel privileged that thanks to the education and the opportunities my family provided me, I get to now leverage all those tools and those transferable skills from being an athlete into being a professional.
Fantastic. We're actually going to dive into those transferable skills in a minute, and we're going to move on to Richie. I love that you both talk already about storytelling, adapting, perspective, because I think those are things that are going to come back a lot this morning. They're really at the center of what you do in marketing. So Richie, tell us a little bit about your journey from a professional perspective.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate that hockey allowed me to go to an academic institution that was well beyond what my school marks were. So I was able to go and study for 4 years at Brown University in Rhode Island. And there was able to, again, use sports and relationships to leave with an economics degree and a political science degree. Now, looking back, 10 years ago, what I learned with an economics degree, I'm sure there's nuggets of it that I apply to today, but it was more like the political science degree started my foundation of writing. I learned how to research. I learned how to write. Again, the theme of storytelling, that is what marketing is, and conveying that just on a different medium. It was about international politics and trying to research 20, 30-page papers for that. But the actual muscle of saying, okay, look at both sides of this, understand, okay, now convey this, okay, now simplify it and distill it so individuals can understand that, is useful today. When I graduated and then when played professionally in US and in Europe, when I had gone to Europe, immediately my communication with friends and family was stretched to either a minimum of a 6-hour time zone to a maximum of a 9-hour time zone. So trying to keep up with a text, a FaceTime, a WhatsApp was difficult. And at one point it clicked and I was like, hey, I can write. I can write. So I quickly opened up a monthly newsletter, and that was just free-form writing, blogging, what am I doing in Italy or in France, or we had a game in Germany, and telling these stories firsthand to friends back home. That evolved into, continuing what I had studied, using it as like a different application, and is useful today. The other part of being an athlete and how it kind of relates to where we are now with marketing is the world of like the influencer, the world of the character that we build marketing stories around. Being an athlete was on the outskirts of that. It was, okay, share this, post this, appear in this video. You don't need to know the details of it. Year after year, month after month, day after day, now the conversations we're in with our athletes for some of the brands we work with, or the athletes that we'll base a campaign around, I'm able to now understand the athlete side of it from that experience, but now understand the acronyms, understand what a lifetime value is, understand what a ROI is, understand all of these little terms that define and say, is this going to be a successful campaign? The gap, though, was when I did stop playing hockey and move back to Boston, I had a bit of a panic mode where I was like, I forgot all these skills that I had. I forgot I knew how to write, forgot I could do all this, and thought that I was like, I have to go work in sales. This is what all ex-athletes do. Ex-athletes go, and I was like, I'm going to go work at a tech company. So I did that for just over a year and a half. And again, what bubbled up was me trying to jump into a marketing meeting, me trying to jump into a project management meeting and distance myself from a sales organization. And at one point, I just listened to it and I was like, it happened in college. I learned I loved writing. When I was in Europe, I returned and remembered I loved writing. Now, unconsciously or unintentionally, I find myself saying, I want to be in these conversations more. Return to it, go back to it. So my core was always writing as the storytelling part of it, and evolved into more digital or photo type storytelling, building out the campaigns, and with every client was able to work with, absorb as much as I can from conversations, quickly learn, and then outside of it, educate on as much as I need to keep up with it. But yeah, so 10 years ago, I totally thought I would have been like a Wall Street person or Washington, D.C. working on political campaigns because that's what I was studying. But looking back, I really was still able to extract things from my education and apply them over the years to where we are today.
I think that's super interesting because it's the conversation of the moment. Sport is changing and athletes are able now to be influencers and be at the heart of their own marketing campaign. And so it's really interesting that both Stephanie and you had sort of that unusual path. And actually, I'd like to dive into this a little bit because one of the questions I wanted to ask you is whether you think that you can pursue a career in marketing or PR or communication and continue to compete or train in your sport at the same time. And I feel like there are perhaps more opportunity for this these days. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this and what would you recommend to an athlete who is currently competing and perhaps wants to prepare for that career. What could they do?
So I actually maybe had two phases of my career. And so the first is I was a full-time athlete competing and going after hard ascents outside and was really focused on that and was writing to supplement that and had this injury. And in the time that I was injured, I realized like, wow, you have a lot of free time when you're not, when you're not training and competing and traveling for your sport. And I went on to found my agency, but at the same time, I sort of had, once business kind of worked itself out and I had a staff and a team and had more time, I went back to training and climbing, and I actually outperformed myself, my younger self, in around 2010, 2011, in that time period. So I was able to do both, but I want to maybe answer this question in a little bit of a different way. I think that looking at young athletes and trying to go out and secure whatever opportunity it is, whatever you see as being your vision for an ideal career in marketing, what you can do now, which you couldn't do when I was starting out, is use social media and other platforms to tell your own story and to really build those connections. I know that I had a very difficult time even getting an interview when I worked for an agency in Las Vegas, which is why I started my own, because I could not get a job. People would look at my resume and say, well, what were you doing for all these years that you weren't working? And, you know, there wasn't a lot of, people didn't really understand rock climbing. So whenever I said, oh, I was climbing, they'd be like, oh, were you doing Everest? Because that was the extent of people's understanding of rock climbing. And it was really quite frustrating. And even though at some points I would even try to explain to people, the benefits of being an athlete, and gosh, imagine here I am in this sport where you can really not make ends meet, and I'm working as hard as I can to be one of the best athletes in my discipline. Imagine what I could do for you if I'm getting a paycheck. And but now, you know, you have that opportunity to do that for yourself, and telling your story and drawing those parallels between your skills as an athlete and how that translates into the business world. I know for me, in running a business, you know, I approach it very much as a climber. And climber is always the first word I use to describe myself. And because in climbing, what we do is we solve problems on routes. And we look at what are our weaknesses and how do I need to train to get stronger to complete this route. And it's the same thing in business. So when I'm approaching business, it's very much as an athlete, although there weren't the mediums to tell those stories. And now you do have those. So I think as an athlete and as a PR person talking to athletes, to go out and tell your story and start drawing those connections between your sport and what you wish to do would be very helpful for you. And that will help potential employers see those connections. And luckily, there are people like the three of us or four of us who are now in hiring positions. And I think there's a lot more, you know, education out there on the hiring side of the value that an athlete will bring to a team. But, you know, you're really empowered to tell those stories. So I would encourage you to, you know, be your own PR person and build and tell your story.
Yeah, and you basically, your first product is yourself. Your first brand that you're looking after is yourself, and you're developing your skills and your experience around yourself to start with. I'm curious, Camilo, if you have any feedback from your perspective working in a corporate environment with a bigger organization. Do you have recommendation for athletes that, first of all, working on themselves, on their own product and brand? Is there other things that they can implement or do formally, whether it's experience or courses or skills that they need to learn to further develop themselves in marketing before they even transition out of their sport?
Yeah, definitely. I think Stephanie did a great job articulating that. And I do think that there's definitely a lot of things that we can do. But Miriam, I'm going to build on something that you said is, I think there's a lot in marketing that it's about intuition and common sense. And you said something that is really important is we all do marketing on an everyday basis, right? Our own images, how we show up, how we speak, how we address to people. And with social networks, and as Stephanie said, it's something that we didn't necessarily grow up with. In today's world, social networks are your marketing channel, right? As you are building constantly and mutating your image and what you put out there. And I think as an athlete, you have an even stronger vehicle to convey that image and to actually sharpen your marketing image around who you are, what you stand for, and how you're let's say, athlete experience can start to build up bridges towards the professional world. So I do think that that's a great starting point. It's not just, and I'm sure you guys have probably seen Social Dilemma, which is creating a lot of polemics in the world, but I do think we need to start looking at social networks differently as actually a tool to tell better stories and to ground ourselves more in purpose, more than just a narcissistic tool to actually just show what you're doing in the world. So I do believe that that's a first starting point, and Stephanie did a great job articulating that. Is I do think that if we use the social tools we have today as great, in a way, platforms to strengthen the way that you storytell, to strengthen the way that you become a purposeful athlete and a purposeful person, because that's the other thing that has changed in the world. And it's the fact that more than ever, it's important that athletes, and of course every professional, has a very strong why and a very strong purpose, right? Gone are the days where it's just about your success as an athlete. I think that athletes now have to use their voices and their platforms to have meaningful impact in their communities or the societies that they actually are a part of. So that's one thing that for me is important. Is I would encourage every athlete, and of course every young rising gun out there, to just think about their purpose and how they want to use their voices, their platforms, their success as athletes to start to create meaningful change, because companies are looking at that. They're looking at how athletes are using their voices to actually become catalyzers of change, right? And that's valuable for companies, because professionals not necessarily have that, right? Athletes start to develop a bigger reach than any other professional. So if you manage to use your reach, your voice, and let's say the experience and the success that you can accomplish as an athlete to start bridging the gap between purpose and the impact that you can have in your society, that's one thing. The second thing is, I've always believed that marketing, it's about storytelling and it's about making people feel something, right? It's really important to know your audiences. And I do believe that athletes have the ability to make people feel something, because you connect with either fan bases or with your audiences in a more deep way. Like you develop an emotional connection with the people that follow you, whether that's your supporting team and that's your coach, it's your, let's say, yeah, your support team, or whether if you're part of a mainstream sport, it's all your fan base, right? Sport brings people together in ways that no other industry or brand can. So I think that understanding how you can use that, in a way, that tool or that power of sport of bringing people together and making sure that you understand your audience and you make them feel something that it's meaningful, so you can build long-lasting relationships. I think that the relationships you build as an athlete, and if you understand how you're building those relationships, that's something that's going to become super useful for how you build brands that build those relationships with consumers. That's something that for me at least has been extremely helpful, is understanding the dynamics of building long-lasting relationships. First, as an athlete, you develop relationships with your coaches, with peers, with competitors, understanding how to, in a way, overcome defeat, how to come better on the other side, overcoming injuries. But you do all that through relationships. And now, as a marketer, I do it every day, understanding your consumer. What do they care for, and developing long-lasting relationships with them. And it starts with developing meaningful connections with them. And it starts with an emotion. So I think learning how to develop relationships through the lens of emotions and, of course, through connections. And the last thing is, marketing is all about curiosity. So if you summarize all this, is developing the curiosity and the interest of all the things that surround us. It's super important. You know, it's reading, connecting with people, understanding what makes people trigger, understanding what makes people feel something, understanding what are different trends and how the world is changing. And to Stephanie's point, how the technology that we're all surrounded by, it's enabling us to do greater things. I think that we shouldn't let us be run by digital. I think that the worst thing that could happen is that we become a society that is driven by technology or by data. We should be enabled by data and the digital technology, not being driven by that. So curiosity, storytelling, driving or creating meaningful connections with your audience, your consumers, or in your case as an athlete, with your support team. That's fundamental. And common sense. We all do marketing every day. Be intentional about how you show up, who you are, and be very clear about what's your purpose in life.
This is fabulous because this is part of a lot of the work that we do one-on-one with the athlete at Athlete Soul, is really trying to help them figure out their purpose. And the earlier you can figure out your why, the earlier you understand that your sport is your vehicle, and you're just changing vehicle when you retire from your sport, and you have a new vehicle, or perhaps more than one at one time. So I think you articulated that really well, and it's fantastic. Richie, do you want to add to that?
I do. Yeah. So my response will definitely be very narrowly focused on the athlete who is still in competition and is beginning to look at the future. And they're saying, okay, hey, this sport ends at some time. What do I do? And to piggyback on the relationships part that Camilo was just talking about, if I may piggyback on it, like take it a step further. And like, I think there's seriously practical things that individuals can do, simple as like keeping contact lists and keeping them organized so they understand what that person is, having those conversations, using platforms like a LinkedIn strategically to say, hey, if I think I've uncovered my passion and it's going to be in swimwear or it's going to be in shoes, reach out to the individuals then and have the conversations to learn from them. It's a lot faster than doing a full-time internship. It might be a 30-minute phone call and you're just like, listen, I'm going to be an athlete probably for a couple more years, but can you just give me some info on what your world is like? That call, one per week even, don't tax yourself, one per week for years. The moment you retire, that's hundreds of relationships that you have that are just one email away that you say, hey, look, I'm looking to move in. People that will want to help you there. Narrowing in on the athlete in existing and kind of piggybacking off some of the things Steph said, that I think athletes right now have so much power. Like athletes are brands. They're their own brand manager. They're also the product. So they're their own product marketer. It's the ultimate testing ground. You can test out things for yourself. Whether you're a writer, test out everything. Test out email newsletters there. Test out different distribution strategies. All of this stuff will return you so much knowledge. And still today, like I write independently of anything I do at Ricky, and I completely separate them. But everything that I do when I'm writing as Richie Crowley, I'm learning. I'm like, I could definitely apply that to these 3 clients. Let me bring that back over. And the same extractions that I take from a client, I'm like, oh, this could actually bolster this right here. So they work with each other. The final piece that I kind of want to add is it will contradict a bit of the activity as an athlete that I'm promoting, which is athletes are intense. We don't just, we learn something on a Monday and it's like are obsessed by it by Wednesday and are just like, it can take so much of us. So I want to, I guess, like encourage an athlete to exhale a little bit and completely enjoy their moment. Like when I was being a professional athlete, living in Cortina in my final season in Italy, in the last couple months, I didn't necessarily enjoy it as much because I had this post-athletic career panic of what am I going to do? I didn't trust myself and believe in myself, but learned so quickly that from the moment I started my first job, 3 months in, anyone who was ahead of me, like I caught up to, and then it just compounds because that's what athletes do. We know how to train. We know how to be intense. We know how to overachieve. So I would also kind of encourage the athlete to say, definitely have that strategy, begin those conversations, but have comfort in not allowing it to completely take over and obsess your life because you are living a dream right now. You're a professional athlete. It's something you trained your whole life for. And for the moment, you're that professional athlete. Hey, it may end next week. And I want to make sure that they have no regret because I have a little bit of regret in, you know, just those final months of not enjoying it as much as I could because I had this fear or this panic of what might come. And it wasn't useful to me at the time. So on top of that, I just, as like a little bit of an out there.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, and we're going to dive into that a little bit in a minute. The intensity of athletes, especially after they retire, is something that comes back all the time as we talk with former athletes in their situation after retirement. What I found interesting in all of your ideas and experiences and what athletes can do when they're competing is all of these non-traditional way of having experiences and sort of volunteer experiences on yourself or internship on yourself. And I would push it even further of not just the interview and working your relationship, but also considering taking, now that we're in a world where everything is virtual and the small courses are also available, is pushing skills into the digital world, into digital marketing. You can learn a lot of things through small courses to add to your list of skills that you have in addition to the network. But I thought those were super good example of what you can do to continue to like have to continue to build your range of skills and experiences before you retire. So I'm switching gear now to this thing of intensity, but also other challenges that perhaps you have experienced as you retired. Like, what were the biggest adjustment that you guys had to make when you sort of were done with your sport and went into the professional world or the corporate world? What were the challenges that you faced, Steph?
So I started, my first job in public relations actually was on staff. I had a temp job because I mentioned earlier I had a really hard time getting a job. And I got this temp job in PR, and it was in a corporate environment. And I still kind of operated like an athlete, even though I was kind of coming through these injuries, et cetera, and went into work and was very, very focused. And I really didn't want to waste time like with water cooler conversations and sort of other things that go into the corporate world. And I felt really uncomfortable in that world, which was interesting because I had corporate internships in college, but I had been immersed in the climbing world for a long time. So that was an adjustment. And I guess, there's something about like you're an athlete, you're performing at a really high level. People are looking to you for maybe guidance in the area in which your sport. They want your feedback, they want your input, and then you're kind of starting all over again. And, that was really kind of tough and maybe like a little bit of a battle with the ego. And it was, as I look back on it now, I kind of think like, wow, that was like the beginning stages, just like when I was learning how to climb. And I wasn't the best climber. I was learning from other people. And you have to kind of approach it again with a beginner's mind, just as you did in the beginning of your sport. But that is maybe a little easier said than done. And also, I think it's just reminding yourself, you are an athlete and you do know how to focus, kind of what Camilo and Richie had said earlier. You are an athlete, you do know how to focus. We're competitive by nature. So for me, I know I kind of set up sort of fun competitions for myself. So my first job in PR, I kind of looked at the results of the person who had the job before me. And I was like, are you kidding me? I'm going to blow that person away this year. I'm going to get a lot more media coverage for this company. And it made it more fun and it made me more successful in my job. And kind of looking at, when you're an athlete, you have coaches and you talk to other athletes about how they're training, and you're doing that reading and research to see what's going to be best for you. And you do those same things in your career as well. So it's just reminding yourself that you do know how to do it. You're just going to take everything that you did as an athlete and you're going to apply it in this business world to learning and growing and evolving yourself in a new way.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. You know, you talked a little bit about the ego, and I think there is a need to prove yourself as you come out of your sport and do it quite quickly. So perhaps there is to Richie's point, a need to pace yourself and do appreciate the early moment of curiosity and growth mindset and relearning something, and it doesn't happen overnight. Camilo, did you have to make some specific adjustment after your sport was over?
Yeah, definitely. I honestly think that I'm still making adjustments. I think it's a never-ending journey, probably. But I can name a couple of adjustments. The first one being a water skier, of course, it's an individual sport. So the first adjustment is knowing that as a water skier, I made the choice on how many hours I trained, how much hard work I put into it, how much I obsessed over details. And I love how Richie talked about the obsession and the intensity that you put in as an athlete. Transitioning into the corporate world, for me, it required a massive adjustment and understanding that at the end, even if I put a lot of hard work into it and it was all about my individual, contribution, I was part of something bigger. So understanding what was my role as part of something bigger was a super important adjustment, because even if you're giving your very best, you need to be able to contribute to the bigger cause, and you need to align your objectives and you need to align your purpose towards the bigger purpose. And sometimes it's not easy because you're part of a big corporation and you don't define, the purpose of that corporation. That's why it's so important to find the right fit for you and to make sure that you really question yourself whether you are in the right place. Because it's okay to realize that you're probably not in the right place and where you can actually put your skill sets at the service of the company. So that was the first adjustment, is understanding that transition from being an individual athlete where I decide how much effort and how much focus and how much intensity I put into my work, to being part of something bigger, part of a team where the collective triumph was more important than the individual contribution. So that was one. The second one, and this is something I'm still doing, it's interesting to think that as an athlete, it's all about how much you focus on your strengths and how you develop those strengths and in a way exponentially build upon them, right? And it's about your individual performance and your individual contribution. Now being in a position where I lead big teams is not about what I do, it's what I enable people to do. So it's almost like the transition from being an athlete to being a coach. And that's not necessarily something we learn as athletes, because not everyone does that transition. A lot of people move from athlete into former athlete and trying to figure out your future. I do believe I had the luck of being a coach, a water skiing coach, and I realized that actually I really enjoyed that, right? I really enjoyed the ability to just unleash people's potential and just build on their strengths and allow them to actually see their strengths. And I think that prepared me for what I'm going through right now, which is being a coach of a team, and in a way making them feel valued, making them feel loved and relevant, and allow them to see their skill sets and their strengths so they can create impact and in a way find fulfillment. So I do think that that's an important adjustment that I would encourage all athletes to think of. Is not just about how you transition from being an athlete into a professional, but it's about also understanding that if you move into the professional world, there is going to be a moment, doesn't matter when, but there is going to be a moment where you're going to transition from being an individual contributor into a collective leader, into a collective contributor. And that is an important transition to make. And it requires adjustments all the time, fine-tuning your behavior. And that's why I was talking a lot about purpose. If you know that as an athlete, your voice matters and that your voice will have an impact beyond just your individual performance, the easier it's going to be to understand that once you're part of a bigger team, even if you're leading your own company, you're leading people. If you understand that purpose and the impact of your words and your actions will have a transcendence in people, the easier it's going to be to make those adjustments.
Yeah, it's super interesting because a lot of team sport, it's important to not only be a performing athlete, but also help your team perform as a group. And maybe that's not something you necessarily experience when you're doing an individual sport. But my guess is, Richie, you have experienced that in the team sport. What was your biggest adjustment, or do you have anything to add to what the others have mentioned?
Yeah. So the first adjustment I made was all rooted in identity. And I know Stephanie used the word ego for it. Since I was 12 years old until 25, any bit of attention that I received was because of my athletic ability. It's if you're on a magazine cover at 14 years old and you're the talk of the state and then a national player at such a young age, like my ego totally blew up and I loved it. I got used to it. I got used to going out in public, being at a bar, a restaurant, a party, and commanding a sort of attention just based off of my athletic ability, not about who I was as a human. And at the moment, at the time, I didn't see the flaw in that. At retirement, though, I quickly learned, I was like, yeah, now I'm just a former. And I was like, am I inadequate because I'm a former professional athlete? What am I? Oh, and then I got an entry-level job. I was like, gosh, now I'm just a 25-year-old entry-level person and all my coworkers are 22. Like, I'm 3 years late to the party on all of this. So I had to overcome that and create this new identity. In the kind of job hiring and selection process, it was overcoming the time gap. It was like, okay, what have you been doing for the last 4 or 5 years? Why should we hire you? You're not, this is not where you enter the company. You're a ground floor person here. And trying to be like, okay, I get that, but you understand within 3 months, I'm going to be here. In 6 months, I'll be here. So finding that confidence. And it came through conversations with friends who said, when you take your job, let them know you want to review 6 months in because you plan to exceed where you would be after 12 months. And you're going to prove it to them and let them know for that conversation. My contribution to the conversation about adjusting from individual contributor to team is I was on a team. And though I knew how to work with teams, I had a sharp learning curve too, where I had to become a lot more compassionate and empathetic to my coworkers. Because in sport, hockey, it was 25 members of my team, 6 coaches, all male. The conversations that we have, the way we communicate with each other is not compassionate. It's not soft. It probably needs a complete overhaul. There's definitely more productive ways to do it, but that is not a way to communicate with a teammate in work, in a work environment. It's just, you can't email like that. You can't talk to a person like that in meeting. There's nothing you can do there. So I had to learn that. And my greatest learning curve there was I became a manager at that first company I joined, and the team I took over was a team of 14 women who were all between 22 and 24. And that was, career-wise, probably one of the greatest learning experiences because I from day one, I was like, please, let me know when I'm wrong. Tell me, point this stuff out. I'm committing to fixing it all in advance, but if there's any part of that former athlete that comes out. So that was really important. A small little add-on too is I had to re-educate myself and become much more financial literate, because as an athlete with our teams, they're responsible for travel. They're buying all of our food and maybe putting us up in hotels, and you're getting paid to play a sport. And then you're out in public and a restaurant might give you a free meal or something. It was this mini celebrity style lifestyle where money to me was just whatever, I'll sign a new contract. And I didn't understand fully rent, taxes, saving, travel, what having my weekends back now would cost. In an athlete, 8 months, 9 months out of the year, I can't go out on a weekend. And all of a sudden I have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. So I had to straight up get financially literate. And I probably wish I had that as an athlete too. Like, I wish I was a bit smarter with my money while I was playing.
It's fantastic to hear you talk about the experience in the workplace, because I can totally relate to this. I started working for a giant hotel company right out the gate after my career, and I was way too intense. And I didn't understand. And I think a lot of athletes feel that, where, you know, you're too straightforward in the way you're talking with others. You appear to be too judgmental with your colleagues. It can be seen, you know, you're trying to advance and work hard, and you have a sense of urgency as an athlete of reaching the highest level the quickest way possible. And, you know, this is not the environment that you go in. And I think for colleagues, often it's seen as arrogant. For your managers, it could be annoying. You're like always pestering, you know, for more or for faster. So I can totally relate to that. And there's definitely a style and a delivery adjustment that needs to be made right out of a professional career. So you guys talked a lot of transferable skills, and we're sort of going to finish on that. You've talked about problem solving, and I love the example from Stephanie on the climbing and identifying the challenges and finding your route. I thought that was a really visual example. You guys talk about passion, adjusting and flexibility, resiliency, building connection. I mean, there's so much curiosity. Is there other things that you want to highlight that you transferred from your sport into your career? And also, do you have an example on how you articulate those skills? Because I think a lot of the issues with athletes is, I think they know they have all those skills. They're aware, they work hard, they're committed, they're passionate, they're going to figure it out, they know how to learn, they have strategies, but they don't know how to transfer this into business style words, or how to articulate it to a hiring manager. So just curious if you have any additional skills you want to talk about, transferable skills, and then how you would encourage athletes to articulate those skills.
I think it goes back to something I was saying earlier about, you know, writing about that or telling that story on your social. And I know for me, you know, I'm a writer. Granted, I work with brands and I help brands to develop their stories. I've worked with a lot of athletes. I have worked with athletes in outdoor sports. I worked with the UFC and some brands that were big sponsors of the UFC. So I worked with a lot of those athletes, and some of them were coming into retirement. And sometimes because of injury, they had to, you know, were forced to retire, and helping them look at that story. And I always find that a really good exercise is to do a lot of writing around it, and to kind of sit down and tell your story, you know, you and your laptop or your iPad, and make those connections. And so what I try to help brands to do is to see the story within the story. Those are the stories that I have to pull out and pitch to media when I'm doing a lot of media outreach. So it's like looking at, you know, who are you and what were the most valuable things that you learned from being an athlete? And then how can you connect those dots to what it is that you want to do, whether you would like a career in public relations or in an analytical side of marketing or creative side of marketing. Maybe you're not sure yet, but if you can start maybe listing those out and doing some writing around it, for me, that's always a way that I am able to do problem solving in my own life. And for me, I mentioned earlier that I had these several stages of a career, one as an actual like young athlete, and the second time as doing this juggling act of being a business owner and still performing at a high level. About 5 years ago, I went in to have a shoulder surgery to finally fix the shoulder that kind of ended things in the early 2000s for me. And when I woke up from that surgery, I found that the fingers on my right hand were paralyzed. So you can imagine you're a writer and your whole life, your adult life, you've identified as a climber, and suddenly you lose this thing that your tool basically. And that, more than anything, even more than kind of retiring the first time, was a really big wake-up call for me. And really how I worked through it and looked at what has been my own personal brand story. And I think I said earlier that the first word I always used to describe myself was climber. And I started to think maybe that was a mistake, or what does that really mean being a climber? You know, who am I really? I'm a person who loves being outside, and I need that. I'm a person who loves to problem solve. I like to take on challenges. I really like that moment in climbing when, God, you're just so scared and nervous, and you really have to control the emotional side of things and think very logically to get through that moment. And I started to look at all of those different things that were under the umbrella of climbing, so I could kind of rewrite my own personal brand story so I could move forward in my life and in my career. And, you know, I really wished I had done that years ago, because I think it would have made the transition much easier. So what came out of that was, I'm a person who loves being outside, and I really value public lands, and I really value my own personal having had access to public lands. And so now what I do a lot in my career, granted I've worked with consumer packaged goods, I've worked with athletes and organizations, but now I work on a lot of public lands projects. And as Camilo said earlier, you know, finding your why. I mean, I love working on these projects. So I'm working a lot with with conservation organizations, local and national organizations. And it's really kind of helped me to connect to the why and sort of redefine my own brand story. So that process I have always found personally to be really, really helpful. And even when I'm sitting down with clients, they sort of know how they see themselves or what they want to be seen as a brand or as an organization. But it's kind of getting down to the nitty gritty of, okay, what does that mean? And if I see myself as this type of person, what are all the actions that I'm going to take as an individual or an organization so that I can make that a reality?
Yes, and I think identifying those personal skills, and you talked about yours specifically, but being able to see those skills and then finding example in your sport life that illustrate those skills is a really good exercise, and something that you can use in informal interviews with people in your industry, but also informal interviews or in the hiring process. So this is not an exercise just for your personal development, but I think it's also a good preparation for the workplace. Camilo, do you want to add anything about transferable skills or anything we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is a super interesting topic, because I think the list it's pretty vast and extensive. I love how Stephanie talked about problem solving. I think pretty much most of the athletes learn how to do that. But there are 4 things that come to mind from my point of view, and I'll try to be sharp. The first thing is it's focus. I think all the athletes develop focus, right? And they develop the ability to be focused in the moments that matter. Till today, I know that I can use that focus that I used to have from water skiing, and especially because in competition you have this moment of truth, right? You've been training for months and months and months, and you get to the moment where you need to perform at your best. And in water skiing, it's a one chance. It's literally 5 minutes, and you need to do your best in 5 minutes. Till today, I have the same feeling that I used to have when I was, standing on the dock before just getting on the water for that competition. I get it before presenting, at work. Every time that I'm going to do a big presentation, I feel the same butterflies in my stomach. And the good news is I've felt it before. So it's a familiar feeling. I know how to actually channel it in the right direction, and I can focus. And I use that focus to actually be sharper in my message and how to actually create the right impact in the audience. So focus can be a very useful transferable skill from using those moments in competition, in training, those moments in sport and then transferring them and knowing how familiar they feel once you start to face them in the professional life. The second one is balance. And different to climbing, water skiing is all about balance. It's about leveraging, the boat horsepower. So you work with the boat, you don't fight the boat, right? And I think that balance is super important. And for me, what I realized as that former athletes, and this is not just about water skiing, they know how to balance better the components of their life that are going to help them perform better, right? And when you're an athlete, you think about recovery, sleep, nutrition, about how many hours a day you need to train, what do you need to train, and you really compartmentalize all those things. And what I've realized is that in my professional life, I do need that balance. And that balance now, it's about my family and still doing sports, still water skiing and training in different things so I can actually perform my best at the office. And I do see the difference between people that don't have that balance and athletes that find that balance and keep that balance. So balance is definitely something that is transferable. The third one is goal-oriented. Athletes know how to set goals and how to train towards those goals. And I think in the professional life, it's fundamental that we're able to establish goals. And when you're part of a bigger team, make sure your goals are connected or somehow ladder up to the goals of the bigger organization. And we need to make our coaches or managers accountable for those goals because we need support in order to reach them. So I do think that that's an important. And the last one is self-awareness. I think that the most important thing that athletes develop is self-awareness. As athletes, we know exactly what are our strengths, our weaknesses, or blind spots, and we work on them, right? And of course, we focus more on, in a way, hyper-revving our strengths more than focusing on our weaknesses, but we're very self-aware. And because of that, and also our training methods, we're very good at taking feedback in because it's our only ways to evolve and progress, right? So I do think, and I've realized that for me as a professional, it's easier to receive feedback, to take it all in, and to work against it than people that have never had this experience, because there's nothing harder than receiving feedback, especially professional feedback. So those are the 4 things that I would say that not only they've helped me, but I definitely think that anyone that has been an athlete can transfer them into a professional world.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up balance, and I've never heard it explained in that sense. I thought that was really interesting, being able to look at all areas of your life and having your lifestyle support, your goal. So Richie, there was quite a lot of information that was shared on transferable skills. Anything else that you want to add?
So not any direct transferable skills, but I'll take a stab at this from a point of view as if I were talking to a prospective partner or prospective employer, and I'm an athlete interviewing and say, okay, what do I have to offer to these organizations and these people? And what I'll understand is that partners, clients, employees are all investments. And if I'm asking a company to invest in me, I want to make sure that they're comfortable with that and they know what they're getting. And the word accountable, Camilo said, and I'll expand on that, where we're in a very interesting environment of work where not only is remote work and flexible hours and finding what works best for someone, all of this is based on and relies on having this trust. So if I'm an athlete, I'm saying, listen, for years, I have shown up with my mind and body every single day. I've had teams trust me and sponsors trust me that what I'll do away from my field will help this organization. And like being able to handle that type of trust and not let anyone down and be accountable is important. I think what wins look like, speaking for me, like if I'm in an 80-game season and we win on a Tuesday night, we're content and we're happy, but our main goal is this championship. And my experience when working from within an organization and now being outside was there was a very low bar some individuals would set for what they would be content and what success would look like. And I think athletes just across the board have a much higher bar for what success actually is and how we pursue that. And finally, I'd kind of ask them to sit back and say, imagine working with someone who has reached the top of their field. A professional athlete has reached the top of this specific part of the world, whether it's water skiing, climbing, hockey, football, baseball, synchronized swim, any of these sports. These athletes have reached the top. They've hit the highest level. Now imagine you have an opportunity to work with the person who knows what it takes to get to the highest level in a specific field. That's an awesome opportunity to bring them in and say, hey, I'll help give them some of the education they may need. They might need to learn what this is or how to use this tool. But the things that you can't coach often is how to put someone at zero and say, get to the top of that field. And I think that's a very important part. It's maybe more of a fall under like the softer skill part of thing, but it's extremely, it's a benefit of having athletes on your team. And I want athletes to know that, to realize what they've done in their sport and what got them there is inside of them. They can learn how to hit the gym again and gain another muscle. They can learn a different way to hold a ski grip or a different way to climb on a rock. But what is making them show up every day and do that and have the desire to be the best there? And that's a major point of difference.
Well, what a way to conclude the morning. That was awesome, Richie, and totally agree. This is what Athletes always based on. And actually, one of our programs spends a lot of time, one, celebrating what you've achieved as an athlete in your career, and all the things that you've built for yourself, not just the experiences, but also articulating and understanding those skills that you have built in the first part of your life that very few other people have done by age 25, right? So I think that was a really interesting summary. Guys, what a great conversation this morning. Thank you for your time, all the example that you have shared. It was really interesting, and I think we dived into some pretty good topics and recommendations for athletes out there. So I wanted to thank you for taking the time, for joining us. Everybody that was on the call, thank you as well. You will be able to find the recording for this event on our website at athletesoul.space, and I will share this information by email with all our participants as well. Guys, thank you again, and have a great week. Thank you so much.